Hello, my name is Patrick Usher, and in this video I'm going to continue to discuss my own personal memories of the time when I had POTS in the first part of 2015, when it was at its worst. I definitely had it for a year and a half or so before that, in a more mild way, although a very concerning way, which wasn't identified. But I'm talking about when things got really bad in 2015. And in my last video, the first one on this in this series, Memories of POTS number 1, my week of hell, I talked about how I was very sick on the island of Fuerteventura, a Spanish island off the west coast of Africa, and how I really wanted to get back, even though I was very sick and didn't know what was wrong with me, and various Spanish doctors had tried to, and a German doctor had tried to work it out, but couldn't. But I had to get back to Dublin because my mum was all of a sudden put into palliative care, and this was a total shock and unexpected, even though of course she had had a 6-year battle with breast cancer and all the different variations on that. But this sort of sudden immediacy and unexpectedness of going into palliative was a huge blow, and I became determined, even though I was sick and stuck on Fuerteventura, that I was going to get back to Dublin somehow. So, to continue on with the story, I took a flight from Fuerteventura to Dublin about a week after a week of being on the island. And you may remember, if you haven't, if you watched the first video, that the effects of my flight from London to Fuerteventura were horrific. To fly with POTS, as I now know that I had, can be disastrous, and it had a doubly traumatizing effect, I think, on an already traumatized and very sensitive limbic system. Now, to take a second long flight was equally horrific, and in fact the result was worse. So I had recovered a little bit over the course of the week in Fuerteventura, but by the time I got home to Dublin from the second flight, which was 4 or 5 hours, the effects were, simply put, atrocious, even worse than the first time. And the first time, around the how I felt after it could have been easily part of a sci-fi movie, but this was really difficult, and the flight itself was very, very hard. I remember in the airport in Fuerteventura, I deliberately bought as many magazines and newspapers as I could, because I was going to try and just read every moment of the flight and try and get my mind off the sensations that I was feeling. But no amount of reading is going to manage to do that. And I remember that flight in itself was very, very scary, because I kept feeling that I was sort of almost going in and out of consciousness, even though I was sitting down in the flight, perhaps due to the effects of the altitude or G-forces or whatever it is that is different when you're in a plane. And I kept getting these sinking feelings that I was losing, about to faint, even though I was sitting, and I felt like my whole body was riding a powerful wave up and down, up and down. It was quite horrible. And I got to Dublin and went to get my bag from security and everything. And I just, again, remember knowing that this was really, really serious, and I started to have blurry vision as well. And I was stuck around all these people, and was getting still these horrible sensations of my legs being filled with like buckets of extra water or extra blood, as it actually was, venous pooling probably, that was going on. And I got into a taxi to go home, which at that point, to my parents' home in Dublin, which at that point was an apartment that my parents were renting. And on the way home in the taxi, I remember it was a very bad taxi driver. He drove far too fast. But the effects of sitting in a car with POTS can be again very scary, because you get very sensitive to motion and changes in motion. And again, the sense of kind of a wave going sort of like through your body as the car changes position or whatever. So that was pretty scary as well. Now, in before I go further in telling the story of this was now late February 2015 up until I'm going to try and cover today up until April 6th 2015. I have to say that I have some that. Well, during this period and also during the period that I was recovering from POTS, I was actually in quite an abusive situation in terms of sort of other people in my life, shall we say. Now, I'm not going to name names and I'm not going to say who they are because I'm simply not. I just don't feel the need to do that. But what I will do is talk about some of the invalidation that I experienced, some of the things that I had to put up with. Because it may speak to, the reason I want to say them is it may speak to the people, people who have POTS and who may experience invalidation and abuse. Hopefully that's not the case, but undoubtedly there will be situations where loved ones or family members simply do not get it and can be quite cruel. Now I've no sort of personal need to name and shame, as it were. I'm not interested in that, but I do want to talk about, from my own experience, without naming names, what I had to put up with and how devastating that was on top of everything else. So I'm just making that point here. So I am going to be kind of quite broad brushed in some aspects of what I talk about. So I got home and after this long flight, and it was very, very scary because I was much, much worse than I had been even a week before, and that was awful. The blurry vision was especially scary because you look at yourself in the mirror and you almost can't see yourself because it's like a greyness that comes down over your eyes. And that was my first experience back that night. And it was I'd say desperately scary. And I got into bed, I fell asleep somehow, and the next day I was going to go and see my mum, who was in hospital. Okay. And I want to say very clearly that I adored my mother, and we were very close, and a large part of the work I do now with the POTS book is very much trying to follow in her footsteps, although she did a lot of philanthropic and charitable work in her time, and although these are my footsteps, I really truly believe that it's very much what she would want me to do. And I was immensely close with her, and during her illness, and she wrote a lovely book, by the way, called The Pink Ribbon Path, which you can find on Amazon, but during her illness, for example, whenever I was home from university, we would pretty much always meditate together in the evenings, and we could talk about most things, and we were fellow seekers, as it were, on the path of life. And so we were immensely close. Okay, I just wanted to make that point. And I still feel close to her spirit. But anyway, so I remember going in that first day into the hospital, and it was hard enough to get there. It's about a kind of 6-7 minute drive. So I was driven in, and it was tough, getting up the steps in the hospital and everything. It was nightmarish. But I got into the room, and I knew that this was different. This was a different situation. There were so many tubes and oxygen stuff and everything all around her, which I'd never seen her in that situation before. And obviously she'd been in hospital before, but never like this in this circumstance. And I knew from the look of pain on her face as I entered the room that this was different, and this was probably going to be the end, almost certainly going to be the end. And it was a very hard thing, because only a few weeks before we had been talking on the phone as if things were stable and normal, and part of me had felt that she was going to still live for many years, maybe 5 or 6 years more. And this is why this was an incredible shock, especially since she only went into hospital for what seemed like a very, well, not routine, but it just, there was problems with digestion, and then it turned out that was the end, So in going in and seeing her like that, I knew things were different. And I still, remember that we had precious moments that first time I saw her, and I remember sort of saying, well, when I was a child, I had this thing, when I was like 4 or 5, I'd in the morning before my mum went to work, I'd jump into bed and hold on to her hair and say, "I'm not letting you go to work." And I remember when the two of us were alone, I just sort of held her hair and said, "I'm not letting you go." And she said that was the first, that was what she wanted to hear, because she was a real fighter. She fought to the very end. And that was always her approach. When she was diagnosed in 2009, she was given 6 months to live, but she fought really hard all the way and never complained. That was the most extraordinary thing. And she became most fully herself in those 6 years. And she was a real inspiring example every day. But anyway, to resume, the pot story. I obviously my mum was concerned about what was going on with me. Even when she was in that situation, she was concerned about me, and although obviously not able to fully give, as much attention as she would have liked. But I remember going home that day and thinking, this is a complete nightmare. This is the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. Not only is my mother clearly passing away, but also that what on earth is wrong with me? Am I dying too? So I what did I do then? So in those early sort of days, when I was at home, when I wasn't able to go into the hospital, and unfortunately I wasn't able to go in as much as I would have dearly wished to have gone in, because each visit would knock me sideways, completely and utterly knock me sideways. I'd have to be in bed for ages after even a visit for an hour, so I wasn't able to go in as much as I wanted, and that's something that I carry with me to this day, and it's incredibly difficult to remember that aspect, because I would have wanted to have been there all of the time, and I wasn't able to be. But anyway, when I was at home, I was trying to work out, of course, what was going on with me, and I had remembered, a friend of mine in Exeter has POTS and had it for a while, and also ME, and I remember wondering if that might be what was going on. So, I looked. In addition to looking at everything else, motor neuron disease and all the other things that these symptoms might have been representative of, I also looked up the criteria for POTS. And I should say that before this, I went to my GP. I went to my MD, my doctor, in very early March. Was it early March? Yes, and went through the whole story with him. And I remember that day very well. Going to him, and because again, since the sensations of that day were awful, I could hardly stand. I was getting very faint. It was a really, really nasty time. I really hoped he was going to say that he could work it out, as to what was going wrong with me. And I remember very clearly what he said to me. He was deeply concerned. I remember he's a lovely man, and very compassionate man, and he was deeply concerned, and funny as well. He's a great sense of humor. But I remember looking at his incredible look of concern as I went through the whole story of my time in Fuerteventura and subsequently, and he counselled that we needed to see how things played out over a few months before we rushed into anything, just to see if things got worse or stabilised or a bit better. But what he also said, the last thing he said to me, and that was in this meeting in early March, was this could be motor neuron disease. And that's not what you want to hear, of course, and it was a desperate thing to kind of go away with. Although he counselled me that it was a possibility, but not fully certain. But we needed to see what was going to happen. And so that was kind of that initial attempt with finding out what it was that was going wrong. But I was also trying to work it out myself, obviously. So I remembered that my friend had POTS, and I thought, well, might as well see what that is. So I looked it up and saw the criteria of the increase from supine to standing of 30 beats per minute, and in general a very fast heart rate. So I started to do that. I started to take my heart rate upon standing, and I remember the first time I did it, taking it up in my neck, and I was thinking, geez, that's going like the hairy clappers. It's just going, it's nonsense. It's so quick. It's so quick. And, I was getting scores of like 130, 135, that kind of thing. And I was like, geez, that can't be normal. And then I got my dad, who's in his 70s, to tested his heart rate upon standing, and it was 90 or something like that. And I was like, geez, this is not good. This is not good. And then I started doing the supine to standing tests myself, and I ordered a blood pressure and heart rate machine, and which makes a terrible noise every time it takes your blood pressure. God, I still get nervous even thinking about it. But and that started to show very clearly that I was always increasing by at least 30 beats per minute from supine to standing. And so I thought, right, this is it. This is what I have is POTS, and all the other symptoms fit with my experience, and made sense. So I'll talk about. In my next video, I'll go into sort of my attempts to get officially diagnosed, which were hampered somewhat. But from that point on, I knew that that's what I had, because all of my scores indicated it. All of the symptoms indicated it, and I do somewhere have a notebook where I would write down, like every few hours I would write down what my supine to standing heart rate scores were, because that's the kind of thing you do, right? It's total, it's not to be recommended really, but that's what you do when you're in that kind of circumstance. So I kind of had a little notebook where I wrote down that information, that data, and also other symptoms that I was feeling. And really and truly, the other symptoms were varied and many, varied and many. And for the first 2 weeks, especially having got back from Fuerteventura, even sitting down was difficult. It was difficult to sit. It was difficult to sit and eat. Eating was hard. The effect on heart rate or blood pressure or whatever it is, that when you have severe POTS and you eat, then you just get this sinking feeling. You're losing consciousness. Really scary. And I was deeply depressed during those first few weeks. And everywhere I looked, but basically all I could do was lie in bed for 6 or 7 hours a day, and then potter down to lie on the sofa or sit on the sofa. And as I say, every 4 or 5 days I'd manage to go into the hospital, and then that would poleaxe me for the next while. But I had to go in, obviously. So yeah, but everything, and also mentally speaking, desperate, because everywhere you look, you are reminded of the fact that you're really sick and other people aren't, Now I did also have a kind of philosophical acceptance of the fact at some level of where I was at, and I started to kind of look into a lot of people who were coping with severe illness, and I felt a real heartfelt connection with those people. But there's another part of your brain which is going, Jesus, this isn't fair. This is not fair. This is awful. This is dreadful. You watch TV. I remember watching a soccer match. Ireland were playing Poland or something. And I was looking at all these people, my age, running around the field for 90 minutes, and I was thinking, will I ever be able to walk for 90 minutes, let alone run? 10 would be fine, but but even how these people, I just felt a real anger that this was happening, and I suppose you could say that that's the mindset of a victim, but geez, not that's just an Irish way. Never mind, but geez, that's you are, when you this happens to you and you have any severe illness, you are a victim, and maybe in time you learn to accept and work with it and develop a more compassionate approach to yourself and a deeper understanding of what life can chuck at people. But in the first stages, you're shouting at fate. You're shouting at fate, and that's very understandable. So my days really were bed, up, sofa. After a few weeks, I started to be able to do things like I could do the dishwasher. I did a bit of cleaning, and then I started to try and go for little walks as well, like very little ones, like literally 5 minutes 4 times a day. But again, I feel pretty faint by the end of that. But that was an improvement. It was an improvement. I tried to meditate a lot when I was lying in bed, not sitting, but just lying in bed. I did a lot of mantra meditation. Tried to do a few hours every day of that. But I tried to read, but it's really hard to keep your mind on anything at all, because again, you're triggered all the time. You read, there was a beautiful book, and actually I really want to mention this book because it's one of my favourite all-time books and has a big part in my recovery in a funny kind of way, which is by Gerald Durrell, called My Family and Other Animals, and it's ITV, I think was ITV or Channel 4, but anyway, ITV, I think, in England, made a TV series of it. And it's a beautifully heartwarming story about a family from 1930s England who get fed up of England and get up one day and just decide to go and live on the Greek island of Corfu. And all of the adventures they have in this, much more heartfelt and warm and open environment of a Greek island. And this is My Family and Other Animals by Gerald Durrell is his childhood reflection of that time. And it's an amazing book of his discovery of Greek life, and he's also became a very famous naturalist, and he studied a lot of the natural wildlife and fauna and creatures on Corfu, and had an amazing inquisitive spirit. And I loved the book, and I read it at the time of being ill, but it triggered me every paragraph, because I thought, I want to be able to do that. I desperately want to be able to do that again. I'd give anything to be able to, go for a walk in the countryside, even. Anything. And so every page of reading it, I was just reminded that I couldn't walk more than 5 minutes, So, and the getting up the stairs was like 1 foot, and then the next foot. 1 foot, and then the next foot. Okay, pause. That was it. It was appalling. It was absolutely atrocious. So I want to, really say this to people. If that is your experience when you have POTS, it's very normal. You are constantly reminded everywhere that you don't have what other people have anymore, most people. And that's really painful, really, really painful. So those were my days. My dad was in the hospital a lot. I was at home. I was crying a lot because I had anticipatory grief about my mum's passing, and talked to her on the phone as often as I could as well when I wasn't able to get in. So yes, it was reading, TV, meditation, lying in bed, and coping with the symptoms. Symptoms being very heavy legs, heavy arms, the wavy sort of feeling of losing consciousness, constant release of adrenaline, non-stop, lying down and standing up. It was worse when standing up, but it was non-stop. And it was powerful. I want to make that point. It was powerful, and it was every 7 seconds. Okay, I timed it. And from all of my, in discussions with people online who have POTS, adrenaline surges, as they are known, very common and for various reasons they point to the fact that it is caused by a brain in crisis, because when the brain is in crisis it sends a signal for adrenaline to be released. Now the curious thing is that part of my mind was very calm, but this more primitive part was lost to the world and in crisis as a result of traumas. And of course this ongoing situation was traumatic, so it didn't help. Go figure. So that was that. Other symptoms I had included reactions to foods. I think these were probably mast cell reactions. I'm not sure though, because I was never diagnosed. I don't know with mast cell stuff. So what should I do? So for example, I had this one night where I had prunes, for example, and prunes were no go. They were no go, and I was completely wiped out for hours afterwards. Just felt like my body completely shut down. Very, very hot, flushes, unable to function. Basically, go to bed, hope it passes. Very scary. Also, I was sensitive to chemicals. Had become so more and more. So washing my hands with soap, I was hit by a wave of chemical smell, felt like I was being poisoned on my tongue. Someone was writing with a pen, I would smell the ink from the pen very powerfully. Things like that, which started to become quite scary. And also sensitive to light, headachy, noise, so I would startle easily, and things like that. All indications of a limbic system in crisis. And then, what happened then? What else was wrong? Sleep problems. I had difficulties with sleep. So in terms of not being able to sleep for a long time, that's a big one. Getting to sleep late in the in the morning, in the sense of like maybe 4 or 5 a.m. Because perversely, in limbic system impairment, for various reasons I must do a video on at some point. You kind of get more awake as the day goes on. Like it's nighttime and you suddenly become awake. And that's very unfair. And you're exhausted during the day, and so this is sort of this natural rhythm is disrupted. Another thing I had, which was really scary, was I would be lying in bed, trying to go to sleep, and I would lose consciousness briefly for a second, and then come back to life. So it actually felt like I temporarily died, and then I would come back to life. And I don't know what these were. They were desperate. They made me associate going to sleep with fear, because, geez, it's scary to feel like you're dying. So just literally it felt like sinking, and I came back to life. And I'd feel an electrical impulse across my chest, as that would kind of spring me back to life. That's what it felt like. And there was one night I had 50 of those. Right, every few seconds I had it. So that was really scary. Now it went away after the less I tried to pay attention to it, and as the weeks went on, and I started to try and engage my brain in doing deliberately focusing on other things, it went away. It died down. I can still very occasionally still get that. If I'm kind of stressed in life, I may get one of those or two. I find that they're very rare, but they can happen. My understanding of them is that they're perfectly harmless. They're not going to kill you. No one's died from them. What I think it's some kind of mismatch between the signals from the brain to the autonomic nervous system. There's some kind of mismatch going on. I'm not entirely sure how, but they're almost like hypnagogic jerks. Which is where you kind of feel like you're falling and going to sleep, but you don't, and you jerk back awake. I think they're almost like that. It's something nervous system related anyway. It is a symptom of a brain in crisis. However it works. That is basically what it is. And I wonder if other people have had that experience. I know certainly that one of you has had something similar. But my feeling is they're horrible, they're nasty, you associate fear with them, but they are benign, and they are another symptom of a limbic system in crisis and an autonomic nervous system where the signals are going out of whack. But they went away. So those are the kind of symptoms I was having, and throughout this time, as I say, there was the backdrop and foreground of my mother and her being in palliative, and I had some very deep and loving conversations with her over this time, and I was amazed also by how she fought. And I remember one particular day where she was incredibly weak, but she got up and she got onto a Zimmer frame and she walked up and down the corridor because she was still fighting. She said, "I'm not going yet." She's someone who gave so much to the world in so many different domains and areas, and she wasn't prepared to throw in the towel, and she didn't. She never did. Actually, she never threw in the towel, and that was the amazing thing. And of course, you hear of people who have a sort of, and death is different for everyone, death is different for everyone, but some people reach a very peaceful and philosophical acceptance at the end. Others don't really, and they go fighting, and both are perfectly valid, both are perfectly valid. So, where am I? Oh yes, I want to talk a bit about invalidation that I experienced. Not naming any names, but various things that I had to put up with included being told that I was making it all up. Alright? That was a big one. I got told by someone who should know a lot better that I had decided to become unwell because my friend in Exeter who had POTS, that I talked to him, and because I talked to him, that had made me unwell, and I decided to have the same illness as he did. Right? Try and work out that logic. I was told that, so basically I was told that my friend had a made-up illness, and that in me talking to him, I decided to have a made-up illness because I was very suggestible. And that actually, by deciding to have it, I might actually have given it to myself. That's how it works, apparently. So it was either that it was made up and I decided to have it, so I didn't really have it, or, I decided to have it and I did have it, so it was one or the other, so I was damned either way. That was immensely hurtful and infuriating, and made me feel very trapped, very, very trapped, because this person was in a position of duty of care towards me, right? I also heard that you decided to get this because you read about it on the internet, which was a variation on that theme. When I expressed to this person that I didn't think I was going to be able to do any major travel, and that I wanted to stay put in this apartment to try and get better, I was told that other people who are sick have no difficulties travelling. What's your problem? To which I was trying to point out the effects of these flights on me, but was completely lost on this person, that this travel had a huge impact on me. I was also told one evening that I needed to learn how to drive because I needed to go and help with the shopping, right? So there I was, scarcely able to stand, and I was given a lecture on how I should learn how to drive, right? So sort of disconnect from reality there that I was having to put up with consistently, and I remember with this person saying to this person that if a doctor says I have POTS, can we agree that that's actually the case? Can we operate on the basis of that assumption? Would that be all right, please? Begrudgingly, I was told yes, that would be acceptable. Did this person look up anything to do with POTS? Did this person read of anything about it? Does this person still does not even know what POTS stands for? Okay, and this person, as I say, is in a position of duty of care towards me, and should have known much better and been somewhat sympathetic or understanding, and wasn't. And so I was trapped. I was at home. I was trapped completely. So there was this vicious circle of the sort of continuous cruelty of this person, interspersed with occasional kindness when it suited him. And I'm not being very subtle here, actually. And the situation of unfolding of losing my mother, whom I was very close with, and being very sick. So it was a triangle of nightmare, of perpetual nightmare, basically. Now, I would imagine that invalidation from family members, close ones and extended and friends can be quite common. If this is your experience, you should talk about it in the comments below if you wish to share it, because POTS is devastating. It is absolutely devastating, and researchers now are starting to really fully understand this. And when I was at this conference in London last week, the continuous thing, the refrain was, this is not all in your head, this is devastating, okay? And it is devastating. One should never put up with shit from anyone, okay? And if there's any, I would almost say, I say from my own experience, I wish I had had the courage somehow to just get out of there, right? I wish I had the courage to get out of there and find someone else who would be sympathetic and understanding and just live with them, because it was constant invalidation. Other things I was told was, you're just anxious, just read a book, you'll get better if you just read a book. You're so caught up in yourself, you're so self-absorbed. That was another thing I was told. And I remember when I was doing trying to prove that I was ill by doing a heart, the heart rate thing with the machine. And finally this person saw, oh, well, you have a heart rate of 140. And he looked vaguely concerned, because he was like, gosh, maybe he really is unwell. What'll I do then? Oh, I might have to actually care for him, right? So, yeah. Other things then from more extended family, there were plenty of people who were very supportive and understanding and close and grew closer over this time, and I really reached out to and was grateful for. There were others, however, who just wouldn't accept it. One person was like, I'm sure all you need to do is go on long country walks and rest for a while. I'm sure that's all it is. No sort of empathy or understanding there, and again others just wouldn't go there, because there was a kind of sense that clearly this is all just made up or whatever. POTS is made up. This is all a made up diagnosis, and it was really, really hard. And all I can say to people who have that kind of mentality and who have that kind of attitude, and some of them are still like that today, I still think, from what they say, or rather what they don't say, and I'm not being paranoid here, but I still think they just don't get it, and they still think I was making it up. And to those people I would say, just shame on you, right? And to anyone who does that, to anyone with a limbic system impairment, shame on you, right? Once upon a time, other neurological conditions were probably also treated in the same way, and now people know what causes them and why they happen, right? And the same is increasingly becoming true of POTS. They're getting there, right? And one day, these people, I hope, will feel shame. It is simply put disgraceful, because the level of disability, or the very least debilitation with POTS, is huge, and it is simply disgraceful that it is treated as a second-rate condition, or even fifth-rate. Okay, people don't get it. So that being said, I'm going to fast forward a little. So this was a kind of overall period of 6 or 7 weeks, which were pretty hellish. I really had to dig very, very deep to get through each day. I had to dig very deep, And I did somehow. And as evening rolled on each day, I thought, well done, Patrick, how did you do this? But you did it. I gave myself a lot of pep talks in the mirror. It was something I would often talk and say, we're going to get through this, and I would talk for hours even, like just trying to really give myself the strength and courage that I needed for that circumstance. My mum passed away on April the 6th, 2015, and and in the end, although she was very, very weakened, the end was much quicker. In the sense that it was, she deteriorated very rapidly at the end. And I remember that weekend, it was Easter weekend, and she died on Easter Monday. And I remember going in as much as I could. I remember the 2 days before she passed away, that morning, I went in and I said everything I wanted to say to her. About how blessed our relationship had been, how much I loved her, and I made her a promise that I would get better, and I would tell other people how to get better. And she said, "I know you will." And so I was able to say everything I wanted to say. And she said everything she wanted to say, and I wrote it all down after that, and I have it still. But the next time I went in, she was unconscious. But I remember holding her hand when she was unconscious, and saying, "Mummy, if you hear me, please just squeeze my hand," and just a little bit of pressure. It's a little bit of pressure on my hand. I don't know what was going through her head then, or if anything. But I feel like she did hear me. So I wasn't there. I wasn't there when she died. She died at about 7 a.m. on Easter Monday. But I remember just literally, it must have been very close to the moment that she passed away, because there was a phone call that came a few minutes later. I remember getting the sense of being kind of wrapped in love and being told everything will be okay and I will always love you. And then like 5 minutes later the call came and we went in and there she was. So odd. But I felt blessed. I felt really blessed, to have had her as my mum, because my life was already complete in a funny sort of way. It was already complete to have had her because she was an immensely special person. And so loving and would light up so many people's lives. And that's been the recurring thing people have told me. So many people I've met since who knew her, who were friends of hers. And it's like there's an open door for me in a way, because there's so many people I've got to know here in Dublin through connections with her, and that's been a real blessing. And she was a very warm and heartfelt person, and my life was already complete. My life was already complete. But I had work to do. I remember getting back from the hospital that morning. I think my pulse was 140 and I kind of fell into bed. And I also thought, like, geez, where do we go from here, I'd made the promise. I was determined to get better. I didn't care if I was still trying to get better at age 50 or 60. I was going to be trying, because that was the promise. But another part of me felt, how on earth can this ever happen? You can feel what your body's like. How do you get better from here? So that was the next phase of the time from when I had POTS. Pretty intense. Life doesn't know when to give you a break, and it still doesn't. But anyway, but that was the hardest 6 or 7 weeks. I've ever had, and hopefully I will ever have, but it was the hardest. So that was that. In the next video, I will discuss the rest of that next month or so, from April the 6th up to kind of May the 11th, when I started the DNRS program. And I will talk about what I kind of did. It'll probably be a shorter video, my efforts to get diagnosed and diagnosed officially, that is, and kind of how I started to get a bit better, and then I'll build up to actually starting the brain rewiring program. So thank you very much. I hope this video, is more personal videos where I'm not going into the intricacies of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone axis and whatever it is you're having yourself. I hope that they're helpful. POTS is a lived experience. It's a real lived experience, personal experience, and what's going wrong with you at a physiological level is one thing. What's happening at an emotional level is a whole other kettle of fish, and it's bloody hard. And I want to share this because I want to say this was the hardest time of my life, and I got through it. And I want you to know that you can as well. I really believe that. I believe anyone can, when they have the right tools, they can get out of it. It is a living hell, but it is possible, and you can, rather extraordinarily, reclaim your life. So I'm going to try and be less weepy in the next video. I think I need a cup of tea. All right, I'll see you all soon, and thank you very much for watching.